Thank you for joining us in this training module. My name is Adrian, and I'm one of the members of the support and onboarding team here at Nexodus. This is a training module aimed at those of you starting to use the Nexodus platform. If you haven't done so already, I would recommend taking a look at the first introduction video, as it introduces some key elements that will be picked up here today. We will begin by looking at how to sell a customer a product from the administration panel. There will be instances where you might have to sell a product directly to an individual without having them go through the admin panel. The best way to do this is to search for the member by using the search bar on the leftmost column of the admin panel. Once you've located the member, click on the name to open up their account. From within the account, you can head over to the Sales section. If you click on Add Products to the Customer, a window will pop up, and here you can select the product you would like to sell. Please note that if the product holds any kind of benefit, i.e. passes or credits, make sure you enable Activate Now if you want this to be available right away. Otherwise, it will only be available once it is invoiced. In cases where you are selling something directly to a member of a team but do not want to invoice the paying member, you can check the box Invoice this customer instead of the paying customer of this team. If a product needs to be sold on a recurrent basis, you can check the box labeled Recurrent Sale and select what frequency you would like the product to recur for. When you hit Save, you have effectively sold the member a product. For members, the charge of the product will be added onto the regular invoice for the membership. However, for contacts, a sale from the back end requires that an invoice be manually raised for the product. The system will only automatically raise invoices for contacts if the sales take place from the member's portal website. Now that you have sold a product to the member, let's add a charge to the member as well before raising the invoice. These 4 tabs here outline the items that have been sold to an individual. If you click on Charges, we'll get the same exact screen as you did when you added a product to this person. Charges, unlike products, tickets, or bookings, tend to be used on an ad hoc basis. This option allows you to add charges that are not a regular part of your operations but may come up in special scenarios. For example, say Kieran here was using one of our meeting rooms and had an incident where the display screen was damaged. This is not part of our regular sales inventory and likely to be a one-off event. After some discussion, we have agreed on a 50-50 split of the cost. I can go into the Charge section of his Sales tab and add the charge directly to his account. The Invoicing section should be used if there is a specific tax rate you would like to use for this particular item, or if it corresponds to a particular account if your chart of accounts has been set up. Again, just like with the product, you can select here if you would like this to be a recurrent charge. With a product sold and with a charge added, we will head to the Invoice section and see how these sales are invoiced. Along the tab options at the top of the customer account, we can see Invoice as the second to last option. If you click on this tab, it will take you to the section that holds all the existing invoices for this customer, both paid and unpaid. Invoices are raised automatically based on the frequency and day set by the plan. In this scenario, we are looking at manually raising an invoice, an action that would only be required if there is a need to raise an invoice outside of the regular cycle. At the bottom of the page, you'll click on the plus Add Invoice button, and this will open up a modal window with a preview summary of the invoice, along with options to make sure we're raising the invoice exactly the way we want to. The first thing you should notice is that the name of the customer and the location you are logged into are pre-populated on the top 2 fields of this window. For those of you working with multiple locations, it's important to understand that invoices will pick up the charges for all sales across all locations and add them to the invoice for the membership, which is raised based on the location of the membership. There is an option to invoice per location in the settings, which is covered in more detail by the billing training video that will go over this. Below the customer and issued by fields, you will see an option to set this to be a draft invoice. This option will create an invoice that does not impact the invoice sequence, nor will it request payment unless it is later converted into an invoice. In the New Invoice Options section, you'll be able to determine what items will be included as part of this invoice. By default, the option to Include All Charges Pending to Invoice will be enabled. These are all the additional charges that have been accrued for this member. If you would like to also include the next period of the membership for this invoice, you can enable the option to Include Plan Charges and select the contract for the membership you would like to invoice. Selecting this contract to be manually raised will add the next period for the membership as part of this invoice. Directly below, you have the option to include plan charges for the team. This is the same concept as the option we have just looked at, but the key difference is that this is for all members of the team. This brings us to an important point. If you attempt to raise an invoice for a customer that is part of a team where combining invoices is enabled, you will not see any charges displayed in this invoice preview. You would have to go to the paying member in order to raise any charges for anyone in the team, as only the paying member would receive invoices. All the items that are pending in Kiram's account, as well as the items we selected, should now be displayed in the invoice. If you would like to add some last-minute sales to the invoice, you can do so by adding products from the drop-down menu right below the line items for the invoice. Adding a product to this invoice behaves the same way as if I was to go to the Sale tab and add a product to the customer's account. If you sell a product here and do not raise the invoice, the product will still be in the customer's account waiting for when the next invoice is raised, or you can delete this product by clicking on the red X next to the line item. Deleting the items will remove the sales from the customer's account. Consequently, if the item is removed, then it will not be picked up by the next invoice. This includes items that are automatically populated in the invoice. The red X does not simply remove the item from the invoice, it removes the sales from the account. Editing the invoice at this point is very limited. You will not be able to amend any of the prices or the description of the line items. The only editing you'll be able to do is changing the date, which refers to the date the invoice is created, and the due date, which refers to the day that payment should be collected for this invoice. Having set everything as we would like, we can now click on either Issue Invoice or Issue and Send Invoice. The difference between the two being that the first only raises the invoice and does not notify the customer, and the latter both raises the invoice and notifies the customer that the invoice has been raised. In this case, we will click on the Issue Invoice button as I do not want to send a notification for this invoice. If you are following along, you have now raised your first invoice. Together, we're going to look at what to do once an invoice has been created. We have a few different options. We can add a payment, cancel the invoice or line item, and refund the invoice or line item. Each of these transactions will lead to a different outcome, and it is important to have a clear understanding of the difference. But first, there are some key concepts we need to understand. First, I would quickly like to cover the concept of due dates, although the term is fairly straightforward. It's important to understand that the due date will be used as the day that payment is automatically requested if a payment gateway is set up. The platform defaults to 3 days after the invoice is created. Each time an invoice is created, the system will automatically collect payment 3 days later. Another important concept is the idea of credit notes. A credit note is created as a result of refunds and cancellations. In simplest terms, the credit note is a receipt that a transaction has been voided or refunded. Credit notes will be raised automatically when a refund or cancellation is completed. If you are still unfamiliar with this concept, I would suggest taking a look at our billing video, as this topic is covered in more detail there. The next 3 concepts will be explained in a little more detail. We will start by adding a payment to an invoice. There are a couple of different ways that payment can be added. If you check the box next to one of the invoices in the customer's invoice list, you will see a bulk menu appear on the left side of the screen. Starting halfway through the menu, we can see a few options that allow us to complete a payment for the invoice you have selected. Mark as paid allows you to pay for the full amount outstanding on the invoice. These first options are a way to force a payment request from whichever payment method you had set up in your account. This means it will take payment via the integration. The options starting at Direct Debit Manual allow you to mark the invoices paid without requesting the payment to come through the integration. When doing this, please make sure you have collected the payment, as once the invoice is marked as paid, Nexodus will no longer try to collect payment for this invoice. If we click on Cash and mark the invoice as paid, a transaction will be created for a cash payment within the invoice. Next, you can select Pay with Credit, and this will use any credit, positive balance from overpayment, or from crediting a paid invoice to complete the payment. The third option is to Pay with Card, which will request payment from the credit card on file for the member. Remember, the system does this automatically when the due date is reached, so this will only be needed in cases where you would like to request the payment manually. Similarly to the way that you pay an invoice from the bulk menu, the same process can be done to refund an invoice. If we select the invoice by clicking on the checkbox, we can see the Refund Invoice towards the bottom of the menu. When you select this option, a pop-up window will be displayed, allowing you to select the method by which the refund is taking place. If you have a payment gateway that supports refunds, you can select the option Payment Gateway, and the funds will be transferred back to the member's accounts, provided the invoice was paid for via the payment gateway as well. You cannot refund an invoice to a credit card when the original payment was manually added. In that case, you would have to complete the refund outside of Nexodus and select one of the manual options to reflect how the transaction was completed. It may not always be the case where the entire invoice needs to be refunded. There may be scenarios when a partial refund is necessary. When only a line item or a partial amount needs to be refunded, you will need to open up the invoice and click on the pencil next to the line item in order to complete the refund. Once we've clicked on this option, we're presented with a window that shows the record of the line item we have selected. At the bottom of the window, there is a More Options drop-down menu. Two options are available: credit this line or refund this line. When you select the refund option, a new pop-up will be displayed. Here, you will be able to select the refund method. This will work exactly the same way as if the entire invoice was being refunded. The second option in this menu will be to select the amount you would like to refund. If left blank, the refund will be for the total of the line item. If you would like to refund a different amount, you can simply type in the amount that you would like to refund. This can be anything up to the total amount of the invoice. The last invoice action we'll talk about in this video is how to cancel an invoice. An invoice can be canceled even if the invoice has already been paid. We will not only look at how to cancel an invoice, but also at what will happen when an invoice is canceled. An invoice can be canceled in the same way that it can be paid or refunded. If we check the box next to Invoice, we can select the option to cancel from the bulk menu that is displayed. There are two scenarios when canceling. The first is that a cancellation is taking place for an unpaid invoice, as we can see in this example. When an unpaid invoice is canceled, a credit note will be created to balance out the invoice so there is no longer anything due for the member. Canceling an invoice will also void any of the line items in that invoice. This means they will not be displayed in upcoming invoices. Anything that is part of a canceled invoice will then be voided. The original invoice will be marked as canceled. The second scenario here is that a paid invoice is canceled. This will create a credit note to reflect the cancellation of the invoice, but this essentially creates an overpayment on the original invoice. So what we will see here is a credit, this negative red amount sitting in the customer's account. This credit will be used against new invoices as they are raised. The process for canceling a paid and unpaid invoice are the same, so make sure you understand the state the invoice is in before issuing a cancellation to avoid keeping unintended credit in a customer's account. If you would like to get a little bit more detail on this process, please take a look at the billing video, as this will cover the topic some more. Now that you have an operational overview of onboarding, selling, and collecting payment, there is one item left for us to review before you begin. To ensure the system behaves as expected, we will spend a little bit of time talking through some of the global settings and making sure that you understand and are comfortable with the options available. This will focus primarily on setting up your website, billing, invoicing, and lastly, bookings. As your website will be the first point of interaction with your customer, we will start here. The first option available in this section is changing the default language and the web address. Following this, we have the options to change some aspects of the home page. The options here allow you to enable and disable sections that appear in the home page, as well as change some of the content of the page. Continuing in the next important tab, we have Features. Here, you will be able to enable and disable the features that you would like to be available in the website and app. Anything disabled from this section will automatically be removed from the members portal. Lastly, we will look at Access. In this tab, there are two subcategories to take note of. First, the default customer access, which allows you to select what default options customers will be able to take when they are signed up. It is key to understand that these options will be applied to customers as they join. If these options are changed later on, it will not apply to customers already created, only new customers. Changing these settings for existing customers must be done at the individual account level. Below the default customer access, we have the access table, which allows you to select what level of access certain customers will receive. For example, you may not want a contact to be able to see your members directory. In this case, you can change the access level to members only. This way, you will be able to curate the content available to the different categories of customers on the platform. It is important to note that while the website is white labeled, if you would like to customize the entire look and feel of the members portal, then you will need to hire a web developer, as they will be able to completely redefine the look and feel of your website by going through the Templates tab, which hosts all the website files for you and your members portal. Website Modules is where you will be able to determine how the features available on the website are set up. When you open this particular setting, you will be presented with the settings for how your online signup will behave. You can enable or disable online signup. And keep in mind, if you disable this option, the creation of all customer records will become a manual admin process. Send new users a welcome email with their access details stipulates whether a welcome email will be triggered as part of the sign-up. Again, if this option is disabled, then sending the email will become a manual process. Users require an invite link to be able to sign up creates a link that must then be sent to a customer in order for them to be able to complete an online sign-up. If this option is enabled, then users can sign up online, but must also be enabled. Otherwise, this option will not work. Keep new member accounts suspended keeps new accounts in a suspended state until they are approved by an admin. New users must choose a price plan during sign-up means that users will not be able to complete and sign up without choosing a price plan. If this option is enabled, but keep new member accounts suspended is disabled, then the payment of the first invoice will be the trigger that activates the membership for a member rather than the admin approval. If you would like to offer additional products during sign-up, you can enable this option. These can also be products that are add-ons for the membership, i.e. a monthly cleaning charge. If you would like to have the members be able to choose their own passwords during the sign-up process, then you can enable this last option. It's important to note that if this option is enabled, then the password will not be included in the welcome email as a security measure. Moving to the last tab in the page, we have My Account. This allows you to determine what actions your members can take from their accounts in the Members Portal. For example, if you do not want your members to be able to request a change of plan or cancellation of plan online, you can disable the first option. In this section, you can select what actions should be available to a member and what they would need to reach out to an admin for. Now that we have determined the settings that should be in place for members interacting with your website, let's take a look at bookings and invoicing. If you click on Booking Reservation Settings, all the global options for bookings will be displayed. Keep in mind certain settings are also available at the individual resource level. For example, requiring bookings to be confirmed by an admin can be set for all rooms in this section or in individual instances in the resource setup. Once you have set up the general options, then it is absolutely crucial to define how we want bookings to be charged. In the Charge and Payment tab, there are quite a few options that will ensure payment for your bookings happens in the way you envision. The first option, Always Calculate Price and/or Use Credit as bookings are requested, will charge bookings as they are made rather than when they take place. If a customer makes a booking for next month with this option enabled, they will be charged today. Consider money credit when showing booking prices on your website determines whether or not the price shown for the booking takes into account any credit the member might have. Use available money credit to pay for products requested as part of a booking determines whether money credit not only pays for the booking hours requested, but also any additional items that may be sold as part of that booking. We then have two options based on member or contact categories. The first option is Invoice and Collect Payment for bookings made by a member or contact as they end. This means that when the booking ends, an invoice will automatically be generated by the system and sent to the customer for the booking. Alternatively, you have the option to require upfront payment for online bookings made by members or contacts. In this case, the booking will be charged and invoiced at the time the booking is made. If neither of these options are enabled for members, the charges will automatically be added to their membership invoice. However, if neither of these options are enabled for contacts, the invoice for contacts will always have to be manually created. The system will never raise an automatic invoice. The last settings we'll look at will be billing, accounts, and payments. When you open billing and accounts, the first tab will allow you to add your billing details, which will then be displayed in the invoice. Notifications will allow you to select the notifications that are sent out to customers. Just like the options in Access, the options here will be applied only to new customers if changed. To change it for existing customers, you would have to go through the admin panel. Contents will allow you to curate what is displayed in the invoice. At the bottom of the screen, there is an option for Invoice Split. The key point I would like to highlight here is that any option enabled will go onto a secondary invoice, but only two invoices will be raised, one for the membership and any options that are not enabled, and a secondary invoice with all the items that are enabled in this list. A few tabs to the right, we have Tax. In this section, you can set the default global tax rate as well as define whether or not invoices include tax. You can also choose whether the price displayed on the website includes tax under the tax display option. At the very bottom of the page, it provides you a section to create additional rates in case certain items being sold use a different rate. The rate can then be assigned to items in the Finance tab. If an item has a specific tax rate, it will always overwrite the global tax rate as this is a more specific definition. Lastly, we have the Accounts option. This is where you can create your chart of accounts in order to track your revenue and run account-based reports. If you are integrating with Xero or QuickBooks, make sure the accounts set up here exactly match the ones in the corresponding integrating solution. Next, if you open up Payments, we can take a look at the options that directly impact how payment will be collected. Under the General section, the most important thing to understand is that make invoice due this number of days after they're created determines when the system automatically requests payment for an invoice if a customer has payment details saved in the system. In this case, the system would collect payment 3 days after the invoice is created. Finally, we get to setting up a payment gateway, which will allow you to collect payment through the system. In order to integrate a payment gateway, you'll click on Payment Methods, search for the payment provider you will be using, and fill in the requested details in order to complete the integration. Once this process has been completed, we recommend testing the payment gateway by creating an invoice for a small charge in order to ensure everything is working as intended. We have now come to the end of our second introduction session. As you can tell, the system is extremely powerful. This also means there's a learning period, and we strongly recommend testing your account before going live to make sure everything is set up as you would like and to make sure you are comfortable with operating the platform. Please feel free to take a look at our module-specific videos, which will go into much more depth in these sections. As always, if you have questions, shoot our support team an email at support@nexodus.com.